Welcome to the second Chess Club video. Today I would like to talk about the goal of chess and focus on the movement of the pawns. Now the game of chess is often called the game of kings because the game of chess really is all about the king. Your goal in playing chess is to trap your opponent's king. At the same time that you are trying to trap their king, they will be trying to trap your king. Each player has 8 pieces and 8 pawns to maneuver on the board to attack the king. Each of these pieces has a different job and each moves differently. Today we'll focus on the pawns and how they move. Now in chess, you never capture the king. You trap the king, meaning you threaten the king. When you're about to capture the king with a threat, you say check. The game of chess ends in an inescapable threat when you threaten the king and he cannot get away. If you threaten the king with capture and he cannot get away, you say checkmate and the game is over. Pawns are often called the soul of chess because though pawns are only worth 1 point each, pawns are the backbone of your army. Pawns make good defenders. Pawns can control space on the board, and at the very end of the game, pawns are very valuable because a pawn, if it crosses the entire board without being captured, you have a choice. That pawn can transform. That pawn can become a queen or a rook or a bishop or a knight. So if at the end of the game you have exchanged, captured, lost many of your pieces, these pawns can replace some of the pieces that you have lost. So people often practice and practice and practice the idea of getting a pawn all the way across the board to do what we call promote. When it comes across the board, we promote the pawn to another piece. Now pawns are very restricted in their movement. And even though, again, pawns are simple pieces in some respect, children have trouble learning the complex way in which they move. So I'm going to explain that. Pawns in general can only move straight ahead 1 square at a time. Pawns cannot move to a square where there's another piece if they're moving straight ahead. Pawns can never move backwards. In this way, they're unlike the other pieces. Other pieces can move backwards. Pawns cannot move backwards. Pawns also cannot move sideways. Pawns can only move straight ahead down their file. However, there's an exception to this. When in chess you want to capture a piece, you move the piece onto the square of the other piece and replace it. Now you notice when I captured that black pawn, I did not move straight ahead because that is an exception. Pawns move straight ahead, but when they capture, they move diagonally. The thing that is difficult for kids to remember is pawns cannot move diagonally to an empty square. They can only move diagonally to capture. So this pawn cannot move here unless this pawn is here. Now, pawns do move straight ahead, but they cannot move straight ahead if there's a piece there. There's another exception to the way they move. In general, pawns can only move 1 square at a time. However, the very first time a pawn leaves its rank, the very first time a pawn is moved, it can move 2 squares. You have a choice. It can move 1 square or it can move 2 squares. But once it has left its rank, it no longer gets that choice. Once it left its original rank, it no longer gets its choice. So this pawn could move here. Now this pawn has a choice. It could go straight or it could capture diagonally. It captures diagonally, it replaces the piece. Now this pawn can capture. A very good game to practice this with your child is called the pawn game. Each player has 8 pawns, and you move the pawns across the board. White goes first, because white always goes first, and you take turns. White moves, then black moves. White moves, then black moves. Now, some kids may think that this is not real chess, but in fact, chess masters often spend a lot of their time playing just with pawns, because the end game, when you just have pawns, can mean the difference between winning or losing a game. And if you can get a pawn all the way across the board without it being captured, you can win the game. One special note about pawn promotion. When you get a pawn all the way across the board, it can promote to a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight, but it cannot promote to a king. You can only have one king on the board. It also cannot remain a pawn, because when it gets across the board, it can't move, because pawns can't go backwards or sideways. So you must promote to something, but you do not need to promote just to replace things on the board. If you already have a queen, you can still get another queen. You can have 5 queens, you could have 4 rooks. You get to promote to your choice of piece, whatever is most effective at the end of the game. Next week, we will focus on the king.